All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. So the topic of this video is actually going to be a little bit more fun. So this is going to be about Van Halen's 5150 album. So if any of you guys follow me on Instagram, you know that I recently bought a 1977 Corvette. So obviously in 1977, they didn't have CD players in cars. They had cassette tape players in cars. So I actually had a collection of cassette tapes because I actually had an Impala a couple years back, and when I had that car, it also had a cassette tape player. So I started collecting old cassettes of various rock bands, etc., etc. So to get to the point, I got out my cassette tape collection to put into the new Corvette, so I had something to listen to. And I was going through the cassettes, and I found Van Halen's 5150 album. So I was looking pretty closely at the cover of 5150, and I realized the bodybuilder on the cover of the album was an actual photograph of a bodybuilder. There was a real bodybuilder on the cover, and I realized that I never noticed that before. I thought it was just a drawing or just some kind of artwork for their cover. There was a real bodybuilder on the cover, and I couldn't recognize who it was. So I figured that would be a pretty fun topic for a video. Who was this bodybuilder on the cover of Van Halen's 5150 album? So the bodybuilder on the cover of this album was a guy named Rick Valenti. So this guy was a bodybuilder primarily in the 80s and 90s. And he was most well known for hosting a television show, which was kind of a syndicated exercise show called Body Shaping. So he was the co-host of that show. And that's what a lot of people knew him from. And I think that's where Van Halen actually discovered him. So from what I understand of Rick Valenti's actual bodybuilding history, he never turned pro. His most noteworthy wins were the Mr. Los Angeles competition, the Mr. Golden Coast competition, and then a second place finish at the Mr. California competition. He was really known for being one of those bodybuilders that hung around at Venice Beach and trained at Gold's Venice with guys like Hulk Hogan, Lou Ferrigno, Flex Wheeler, and other guys during the 80s and 90s that were really big name bodybuilders. So he kind of hung around with that crowd, and that's how he was really well known. He was also on the cover of Flex magazine in the October 1984 edition. So it seemed like in addition to bodybuilding, he was also trying to be kind of an actor, kind of a celebrity, and he kind of tried to get into other things. He was in over 41 different commercials throughout the span of his career. He was in 40 magazines and book covers, and then of course the album cover for Van Halen's 5150 in 1986, which sold over 10 million copies worldwide. So for those of you who aren't familiar with 5150, this had songs on it like Why Can't This Be Love? It had Love Walks In, Best of Both Worlds, Summer Nights. So a lot of those good Van Halen songs were on this album. So I was definitely listening to this album on the way to the gym the other day in the Corvette. So I really do enjoy that album. So even though Rick Valenti was just an amateur bodybuilder in the NPC, he was still very well known during that time period, and he had a very, very good physique. You got to keep in mind the 80s and 90s were a very competitive time in bodybuilding history, so it probably was pretty hard at that point to turn pro, and they definitely weren't giving out pro cards as easily as you can get them today. So it definitely was a lot bigger deal in the 80s and 90s if you were to turn pro. So his best body part, a lot of people would say, is his triceps. He was well known for having really good triceps, and his conditioning was very good as well. So I actually dug up a pretty old interview with Rick Valenti where he talks about getting the Van Halen gig. So he says actually they were looking for a bodybuilder, so they did a casting call at Gold's Gym Venice. He showed up to the casting call. He got the job right away. And he says once he got the gig, he got to hang out with Van Halen for over 3 days, and he said he had a blast doing it. So pretty cool that they did a casting call at Gold's Gym Venice. So I thought this would be a fun little video for you guys. You guys might enjoy it. Nice little piece of bodybuilding history where bodybuilding crossed over into a mainstream form of media like classic rock with Van Halen. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.